Hello and welcome back to PA Chalk Up. Today we have Neil. Hi Neil, how we doing?
Good man. How are you?
I'm good. For people listening in, if you just give us a little background on who you are and what you do.
So my name's Neil. I'm from the Scottish borders. I grew up here. I guess the main reason I'm on here speaking to your good self is I'm a yoga teacher. But on top of that, I do tree surgery a few days a week, and I also deliver coffee. So I'm self-employed. I'm freelance. But the yoga teaching is something that has allowed me to sort of go part time with the tree surgery and step into that a little bit more. I'm a father of two children. I've got a wife and two kids, brilliant kids, 4 and 2, and we have one on the way, which is very exciting.
That's all good. So you're also on because I've taken some of your yoga classes and it was probably one of the hardest workouts I've done where my body was physically challenged and I've done weights since I was 13. So there's something that can be attested there. So if you just give us a little background on like your pathway through yoga and how you originally started and how you got to where you are.
Sure, yeah. So I started yoga around 10 years ago when my wife and I lived in Glasgow. She's a teacher. She was doing her teacher training in Glasgow. And I actually started just on YouTube, like a lot of people do. Um, I was thinking, you know what, I might give it a shot, try some stretching, see what it's all about. So, like a lot of people do, pulled up YouTube, just beginners yoga, and you're flooded, as you're probably aware, of just millions, thousands, millions of videos. So I just went with the top ones, and I started I think I started a 30-day challenge, I think, and it was with Yoga with Adriene, who's very, very popular on YouTube. She's global now. She's most people that practice on YouTube will it'll come up with Yoga with Adriene. So I started there and completed that 30-day and started to look for a little bit. Yeah, exactly. There she is. So started to look for a little bit more um, yoga and what it was about. So I just continue with these 30-day challenges. And I would say really I am a product of yoga on YouTube, which
Mm,
is, I guess, controversial in a way because, like, historically, you would be going to a studio and practicing with the teacher one on one. But I really found yoga through YouTube, through lots of different teachers, and then slowly from there, I started going to studios. So we moved to Bridge of Allen near Stirling, and I went
yeah.
to, I think it was called the Wee Yoga Room. I think I've got the name right. Um, and I did an Ashtanga yoga class there, which is quite an old form of yoga asana, the physical yoga. And I was just absolutely blown away. Yeah, that's it. That's it. I was absolutely blown away at this Ashtanga yoga. It was 90 minutes in a small room. There was like 16 of us in the small room. There was no music, and it was just breathing and sweating. And like you said there, it was one of the hardest things I'd ever experienced in my life. I was like, I have never done anything like this. There was a mantra at the start. We were encouraged to focus on breath, movement, and I don't practice Ashtanga anymore, but it's considered quite a strict. I guess, yeah, I'm right in saying quite a strict form of yoga in that there's a primary series, a secondary series, and then advanced series, and you don't really move on until you can go through certain asanas, the certain moves. So I was completely blown away by this. So deeper I went down the rabbit hole of yoga. Um, and then my wife and I did a bit of traveling, and every time we went to a new place, I would just try and go to a new yoga studio and see what it was all about. But the whole time continuing my home practice daily. So I think overall I've definitely practiced at home more than I have in studios, um, through YouTube and online classes. Uh, and that's kind of how it all started for me with yoga. I think with Ashtanga, certainly, I realized that wait just now, there's more to this than the the physical. There's more to this
Mm,
than the moving. The breath, very important. The awareness of breath, the awareness of the body, but also like the community, like doing something, moving, doing the same movements together at the same time. There's something very powerful about that for me.
There's a little bit of credit that you're due with like home learning and these different types of YouTube channels and sort of different places you've gotten your practice from. You can learn from a vast majority of people that are in that space, and you learn different techniques or different ways of doing it. And I can see how that kind of comes out in your own practices,
Hmm.
because you don't just stick to like the normal flow progression of yoga. You kind of dot in between your practices and implement
Hmm.
different things.
Hmm.
You're also very science based as well, which we've previously spoke about that I really appreciated. Like you were actually explaining what we were doing and why that's beneficial. Is
Hmm.
that something that you've sort of developed going through these YouTube channels and then your own a practice into these studios and then developing into your qualifications as well?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I've been interested in the mind. I guess the mind is such a broad term. I've been interested in the mind and mind body connection and neuroscience probably longer than yoga. I've not studied it to any like university degree or anything. Just a hobby interest, reading books, watching stuff about it. And one of my big inspirations for the way I teach now, in terms of my science based and my anatomy based stuff, the reason I like to explain stuff is credited to my teacher, Alice Gray, who I did my teacher training with in Glasgow. So I qualified 2 years ago. And Alice's approach is I met Alice at a yoga festival, yoga and adventure festival, years ago. I took a class with her. Yeah, there she is. Shout out to Alice. She's fantastic. And when I met her, when I took her class at this yoga festival I was volunteering at, I was blown away at how precise and deliberate her cueing was. She didn't
Mhm,
need to demonstrate, just the way she would explain things, your body would just go there. And I found that very inspiring. So a lot of my anatomical inspiration, I guess, my hunger to learn about the body came from her and the yoga teacher training I did with her, because that's a big focus in her classes now as well. She now lives in Dubai. She teaches out in Dubai, um, and she does a teacher training in Glasgow every year. But she does trainings online also. I'm currently going through an advanced anatomy training online with her just now, and it's sort of do it at your own pace, which is really nice,
mhm,
especially when I've got kids. Um, and I think as well with explaining it anatomically to people, um, sort of lifts that veil, because a lot of people, the word yoga nowadays is so loaded. You can go in
mhm,
so many different directions. A lot of people see it as just, yeah, being flexible. I'm not flexible. I can't do yoga. A lot of people see it as, well, I'm not spiritual like that. So there's so many ways you can look at it. So I think a good sort of like foot in the door, opening the door for someone, is to say, listen, we're going to do these asanas, which are the moves, the postures, and the reason we're going to do this one is, ABC. Take your pick. Good for your posterior chain. Good for your hamstrings. Will help calm your nervous system down in a more restorative pose. Stuff like this, because I feel like teach what you teach what you practice. And I like to practice stuff like that, where people are explaining stuff. They're explaining what's
mhm.
happening in your brain when you're doing certain things. So yeah, it's something that interest has definitely developed over the years and continues to. But Alice was a big inspiration for that, for sure.
With the essential cueing that you do, what's how do you create these your clients and participants in your classes?
So do you mean like how do I come up with the sequences that we go through?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've always struggled with like homework and like admin and writing stuff down. So I actually don't write down my class plans, because I feel like if I was to write it down, I'm then pressured to do that,
Mhm,
right? And there's something that would make me quite anxious about that. Even having that plan there, I feel like I'd be looking at it. So what I do is normally I do the same flow for a week or a couple of weeks when I'm teaching. I teach about 4 or 5 classes a week and then some workshops sometimes. And it'll ebb and flow throughout the year, but quite often it's what I'm practicing at home as well. I know I know I can do it. I know I can explain it. And then it's also what I find fun, right? Because it can all be very, very serious. So I want to try and create an aspect of like play in my class as well.
Hmm.
So introducing some of the more sort of animalistic type movements into class, and get people falling over it in a safe way. Obviously, get them playing, get them trying to like laugh at themselves. So I would say like normally I teach later on in the week, so I teach on like a Thursday and a Friday and a Sunday. So at the start of the week, I'll start to move through stuff in the morning when I'm up. I'm usually first up in my house. Um, I get onto my mat in the morning and start moving through stuff, maybe follow a YouTube video and start feeling right. Would that fit with that? Maybe I find some inspiration through a video or from a teacher I followed on Instagram, and mix one with the other, and then go from there. Really. And I think as well, it's made me develop a skill in that I can, in the moment in class, I can change it. I can go off script because they're not really a script, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if I feel the class is fatiguing, I can be like, right, I'm going to take it down now, and there's no pressure of being like, oh, but I haven't done my last thing that I wrote down,
Yeah.
right? Because there's no point in pushing people to the point where they're not actually enjoying it. It's good to push to failure,
Mhm.
but if people are like, listen, this is too much, so you read the room. So I think it's good to be able to adapt like that, and that's something I've definitely developed over the past couple of years.
Yeah, I think this is a really good contrast between like the coaching industry and the yoga industry, where it's a little bit more like off the pedal,
Hmm.
and it's more feel what you feel as opposed to just get through these sets and reps,
Right.
then you know
Yeah.
the next
Yeah.
one. Is that something that you've obviously explored through your experience? Is that when is that time to like start taking it back down?
You can definitely tell in a class when, because obviously I've got mixed abilities. I don't offer a beginners class or a advanced class. I just say everyone come. There'll be something for you. There'll be modifications for you. But I can definitely tell just by body language. Obviously, it's one of the biggest communicators, right? Breath as well is a huge one, because I've been, I mean, been breathing since I was born, right? But because I've been
Like
practicing,
focusing on that. Yeah.
yeah. I'm really honed in on people's breath, and they say that, not that I watch much fighting, but apparently when you're watching like mixed martial arts or boxing,
Nasal breathing
yeah, when someone start
and
their
when it
their mouth
breathe.
drops, chances are that person's gonna start fatiguing and maybe lose the bout, the fight, right? So it's the same in yoga classes. I generally feel, because my I would class my classes to be on the stronger side. I would say it's like probably strong vinyasa. I would class it as like functional strong vinyasa, and you can start tell when people start losing that discipline with the breath, with the nasal breathing, and they're having to take more breaks. That's when you're like, okay, I'm gonna tone this down slightly. So yeah, body language is one of the biggest communicators, right? It's how we communicate, 75% or something. So you can sort of assess the room. But I will say to people like, right, for those that want to stay here and challenge themselves here, say we're doing some core or something, you stay here. For those that want more, you can follow me now. And then for those that want even more, and then I always try and explain to my students, there's always more. Like if you want more, there's always more. We can keep going and keep going and keep going. It's an infinite thing. You can make things softer, 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 or harder, harder, harder.
I chose the softer, softer, softer. No, but you kind of touched on something, and you've been kind of going back to it. How important is the breath work in your classes, and how do you cue those breath exercises?
So breath and breathing is just so popular now, right? It's quite amazing how it's really taken off the past. I mean, in the time I've sort of been keeping an eye on the wellness industry, so to say, the past 8 9 years, I've seen breathing and breath work explode through scientific stuff, but also like the spiritual stuff, the emotional release, the Wim Hof type stuff. Um, so over time, I think in yoga, it's certainly a lot of it is down regulation breathing, sort of
What do you mean by down regulation?
so down regulating the nervous system. So trying to remain in a calm state, even if the body, even if you're challenged, trying to extend the exhale and sort of convince your body that this is fine, I am safe, I'm in a safe space, and I will get through this, right? The way I get it across in class is that we start class normally with like 2 to 5 minutes of just arriving into that space. And I talk about, I get people to close down their eyes if they can, because that'll help activate the insula in their brain, which increases your interoception. So focusing on like your inner landscape is a good way to think about it. So your breath, your heartbeat, the taste in your mouth, the feeling in your gut, your stomach, things like that, you know? And I think it's quite easy to overwhelm people with like, right, we're going to do breath work and throw in some really, heavy sort of breathing stuff if they're just new
Yeah.
to it. So I think getting people just to notice their breath and notice if they're breathing up in their chest or if they can take slow, like low, slow breaths using their diaphragm, allowing their diaphragm to descend. So getting people to notice at the start of class. And then throughout class, I don't really say to people, right, when you lift your arms up, you must be inhaling. Like I
Mm.
say inhale arms up occasionally, but I'm not cueing it all the time because I want them to be getting the asana. I want them to be the neural pathways learning the sequence, right? So when we go through it later in class, they're flowing through it. But I do bring up breath more during the sort of stronger, more what you class as like challenging phases of class. So the longer holds, if we're doing some core strength based stuff or arm stuff, a lot of pushing in yoga. If we're doing that and I can see people start to shake a little bit, I say, come back to the breath, come back to the prana. What is your breath doing just now? Is it way up here and you're or can you really control it, so I try and just get them to notice it because for your average person, I reckon most people go throughout the day probably not even noticing how they're breathing, right?
Mhm.
So when they come to class, just getting them to focus on breath for an hour is really intense, right? So I touch on it now and then at the end, we might do some sort of calming breath work. One I've been using a lot recently is the cyclical sigh. So inhale through the nose, followed by a short inhale through the nose, followed by a sigh out the mouth. Apparently, this is one of the most effective ways of calming sort of anxiety and stress in real time. I
Yeah.
think it was
Would you mind demonstrating it?
sure, yeah. So
I'll do it with you.
sure. So when we're breathing in through the nose, it doesn't have to be aggressive at all. Okay. And just as you think you're at the top of your inhale through your nose, pause and then inhale again. But as you inhale again, what I see a lot is people breathing with their shoulders. So they tend to go like this. They go
Mhm.
like that. Okay. And this is just wasted energy. Okay. Or you might put your neck out or something, right? So we breathe down here with a diaphragm. And then when you exhale out the mouth, the way I describe it is it's called the cyclical sigh, but we're not looking to sigh like like really force it out. Like allow it to as organically as you can fall out of your mouth. Like oil coming from a bottle, just nice and sort of almost flawless. I don't know if that sounds too
Mhm.
perfect, but like
Yeah.
naturally fall out of your mouth. So, for example, something like, and then
My
again,
shoulders did rise there. My
yeah,
shoulders
yeah.
did.
So you notice that it's interesting, but that's good because that shows that you're aware of your shoulders rising. Some
Mhm.
people, I notice some people when they do this on that second inhale, they'll squeeze their palms. You know,
Mm.
so we really want to separate that breath and body and just be still. And this is why I think it's good to practice these things at the end of class when we've burnt off some, some of this physical energy, right?
energy.
We can sort of sit in calm a little bit more.
What's the different types of breathing exercises that you go through during your practices, and how do you sort of space them out?
I start with some longer exhales. More recently, I think one of the most basic ones you can do, and it's so effective, is that I get people to identify their inhale. I don't count for them because I've found going to classes in the past when a teacher is counting the inhale for you and your breath's not matched to that and they're counting slow and you're like, I can't breathe any longer, right? So I always say to people, take a couple of inhales and exhales, and the next inhale you take, count your count, whether that's three or four, how long that inhale is. And when you exhale, try and add another one or two or three onto that. Okay. Because in
Mm,
general, when we can extend the exhale, it helps us calm down. And if we increase the inhale and drop the exhale down, it brings a little bit more energy into the body.
yeah.
Rule of thumb,
Where do you
obviously.
where do you think this breathing through exertion has came from, and why do you not see the benefits of it?
So, I mean, when we're exerted, do you mean the benefits of, like, say you're really really tired, and you're saying,
Uh, no, so this notion that okay, we're going to breathe in as we raise our hands in three, two, one, and
okay,
then
got you, yeah,
because
got you.
like some practices that I've followed, like again, it's just from some YouTube channels and some other stuff that I've done, they've always cued to breathe in on like motion or contraction phase.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah. I mean, I think, like, anatomically and biomechanically, there's probably benefit to, like, say you're putting your hands over your head, you're creating quite a lot of space here on the inhale, and then when you fold forward, you generally exhale because you're folding forward, you're limiting the space in this area, right? Occasionally in class, I've gotten people to go through like a sun salutation. So I describe sun salutation as like a deconstructed burpee. So inhale, hands overhead, exhale, fold forward, inhale, halfway lift, exhale, plank pose, lower down, inhale, back bend, exhale, push back to downward facing dog, which is like a inverted V position. So I've occasionally in class got people to go through those, but with the opposite breath, just to throw them off a little bit. And it throws me off as well. And it does, there's something about it that doesn't feel natural to sort
Mm,
of like, right, exhale, hands overhead, inhale, fold forward. It doesn't feel quite as right because when you're inhaling and folding forward, you're expanding and you're coming over that into a forward fold, you know? But I mean, maybe it would take someone with more sort of qualifications, physiotherapist or something, to explain the real ins and outs of it. But I think that there is definitely something in that breathing in certain positions. But I've found people really get caught up in it, and I've heard people in class saying, "Oh, I'm doing it wrong because I didn't inhale there," and you're like, "No, no, you're not. There's no wrong. Just focus on the movement and then the breath will come." I find with people that the breath is definitely the harder bit.
hmm So the reason I bring that up is because you are right. The diaphragm opens, the more air you can get in, you fold forward. It's like a bagpipe, you're squeezing out the air. But what I found when in your practices is I wasn't as focused on the breath and during these moments because that's all I would think about.
Mm-hmm,
And then
mm-hmm,
I was able to actually just go through the movement in my time. I was puffed out at the end, but then
mm-hmm,
again, that comes into your cardiovascular system. Like, how
mm-hmm,
fit are you to actually breathe as you're suggested? And
mm-hmm,
I think the good thing with the way you're putting forward your practices is that yes, breath work's important because you kind of need to breathe, but it's not the sole focus of everything that you do. And I
mm-hmm,
think it's a good thing to let people feel the movement first,
mm-hmm,
and then introduce that breath when they become fitter or they're
mm-hmm.
more used to the practices. Is
Yeah.
that a fair statement to say?
Yeah, I would agree. I would certainly agree with that. I think especially in a class like mine, which is maybe on the stronger side, maybe on the faster side sometimes. I think getting people used to the sequence, the style of movements that we're doing first and then introduce the breath. Because I see it in people that I've been teaching for a couple of years now, they don't feel like their physical practice has progressed. And I see it objectively, but it's much harder to see it when you're in it. I can see it. But what has progressed is that they're not quite as hattered, or they're not quite as like annoyed when they fall over,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're not like hating on themselves as much. In yoga, we talk about ahimsa, which is not non-violence, and it's not just physical violence. It's negative words towards yourself as well, like negative self-talk. And I think part of that, the reason, part of them not doing that as much, is because they're in more control of their breath. I often
Mm-hmm.
say breath is it's information for the body. If you start sitting on your couch and just start hyperventilating for ages, your chances are your heart rate will go up and your stress levels will increase, your pupils will dilate. That's just natural. Or if you sit on your couch and focus on long, slow breaths, it might calm you down. And
Mm-hmm.
it's true information for the body. The body feels it.
I've been tampering with. Fun fact: I if I have something on that day, my alarm is my best friend, and like I'll wake up straight away. But
Mm.
if I've got an alarm on and I don't necessarily like have to have something on that morning, like I'll just hit snooze, and I'll just snooze for like 10, 20 minutes. But I've been tampering with the idea, and I can't remember where I read it. There was like these sharp breaths in like a raise your heart rate, and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I'm still a little bit skeptic because it doesn't always work.
Hmm.
But for the times it has worked, I've been like, okay, this has actually alerted me for this time being. Let's use this momentum to keep going.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that something that you've tampered with before, or?
Yeah, I'd definitely say more on the other end of the spectrum in terms of like helping me calm down. I'm not something, well, two young kids, so I'm up early anyway.
Anyways?
But over the past year, I've actually been one of these people who gets up and into an ice bath in the morning. So I've been doing that pretty consistently for about a year now. So I've never found a problem in sort of like finding that energy to get going. I drink coffee in the morning, which helps, but I've definitely struggled in the past with calming down,
Mm,
even on like an anxiety level and like panic attacks. I've had a few panic attacks in my life, and that made me quite scared. Like how can I control this? So I've
mhm,
definitely been more interested in like what can I do to calm this down. So yeah, definitely on the more sort of cyclical sigh, um, breathing in for 4, try and breathe out for 8 or 10 or even more. And when you first start practicing that, like in for 4 and out for 6 feels a lot, but do it consistently daily over months and months, and you quite soon realize that you can breathe in for 4 or 5. This is just my counts, and your exhales can be 10, 12, 15, sometimes 20, even more. You really slow that exhale down, and you don't panic as much when that CO2 level builds, and that sort of air hunger becomes real, right? Because you've got enough oxygen in your blood. It's just a mental thing, a lot of it, and you're just like, no, I will breathe again. I'm okay. So I've definitely more played around more with the down regulation. Saying that, up until the past um, year, which in November I did a breath work.
mhm.
It was
Yeah,
on a
we
retreat.
think we spoke about this.
Possibly, I did a breath work that these guys called Oxygen Experience, um, and it was very much like upregulation, hyperventilation. We maybe did speak about that, and that completely blew my mind. To be honest, that was quite amazing. Yeah, these guys. Shout out to Reese and Grant. They're opening a studio, or have opened a studio in Stirling. Um, they
Oh,
do
sick.
they do breath work and cacao. I think someone's going to be teaching yoga there as well. Lots of different modalities going on. So I'd heard about that sort of upregulation breath, inhaling like over and over and over. I'd read a lot about it and the Wim Hof stuff, but I'd never tried it. So I got a chance to try it for the first time back in November, and it completely blew my mind. I was like, wow, I've been telling people how to breathe for a little bit now and practice on my breath, but very much the other end of that breath spectrum. Um, and that was just a totally different thing. That's
Yeah,
it really raises it can raise the heart rate, and yeah, all sorts of stuff.
it's interesting as well. So when I'm a big fan of the Wim Hof method, and that's something that I do just before going to bed.
Mm,
Again, for some reason, I just like get into this little zone and then just
mm.
pass out, which is ideal.
Yeah, nice.
Um, but, like you kind of feel like numb sometimes, which is a weird feeling to experience. But
Mm,
you sort of just have to keep calm through everything.
mm,
And like I think for me anyways, it helps to know that like you've always got 12 to 20% of oxygen left after you breathe out. So your
mm.
body's not going to let you die.
Right.
Like it will always store those at 12 to 20%. So you do have
Mm,
it. So it's like how long can I go? And it's that oxygen starvation where you're like going through this panic mode and like I need to breathe,
mm,
I need to breathe. But if you just stay calm and like
mm,
slow your heart rate
mm,
down, like
mm.
I find this very fascinating. That's why I'm kind of wanted to pick your brain on it.
It's it is fascinating, and it bring it for me. There's a real sense of achievement when you're doing these breath holds,
Hmm.
especially on that long exhale with that Wim Hof type stuff. That long exhale and hold, and you're like, okay, I need to breathe now. And we
Hmm.
do. I touch on this a little bit in class. I encourage people to, like, if you feel the need to inhale, you're okay. Maybe take another second or two, and then inhale calmly through your nose. But I feel there's a real sense of achievement there because you're battling yourself, you know. And like you said, you touched on the numbers there. If you know the numbers, you know you're safe, right?
Hmm.
Or if you don't think you're safe, do it with someone who's trained, or do it with a friend or a member of family there. And there's a real sense of achievement when you do finally take an inhale and you're like, man, I didn't think I would be able to do it for that long, there's a real sense of accomplishment, which I really like. And you're just going up against yourself. It's just you and you in the ring and your breath, right?
I
Um,
always try to compete with myself on my previous breath. Like I think
mhm,
the longest I've ever went was a minute 45,
right.
which is it's not a lot. Like according to some of the people that
It's,
practice it, but
it's
for
all
me, like
relative, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. That's like for me, that's quite impressive.
It fascinates me in so many ways, and how it can really help people. And I've seen people have incredible experiences doing that type of breath work, and I myself personally have had incredible experiences doing that type of breath work. Recently is November, and then I think it was in early March. I was back in Glasgow with Reese and Grant doing another breathwork session with them. I took a friend along, and they get you with headphones on,
Mm,
and Reese is talking to you the whole time, sort of cueing you, telling you you're okay. And I'd always been like, I feel like I've always been quite a healthy skeptic, um, even
which
though
is a good thing to be.
which I think so. Yeah, I think so. And even though I have been involved in the sort of wellness yoga community, I guess, for a while, or certainly an onlooker, um, I'd in the past been involved with like psychedelic communities and plant medicine and stuff like that. But I've always been a healthy skeptic about these things. But words like transformational and you know trauma, when trauma shifts and stuff, I've always been a bit like, oh, I'm not sure. There's been an uncomfortable, it's made me a little bit uncomfortable, and that's just to do with me. But I certainly feel like with that type of breath work, you can get to places where you feel stuff shifting. You can go quite deep into your consciousness. Can really get out of your body. And it's quite an amazing experience, and I think for some people it can probably be quite intimidating, quite scary also.
100%. It's a good thing that you bring that up because we previously discussed your work with David Ross. Just give us a little background on what it was that you did and how you're involved with it now.
Yeah, sure. So I was back end of last year. Um, I started getting, well, sort of middle of last year. I started getting more interested in. I think part of it is because I'm a father, and started getting interested in masculinity, I guess, and being a man and what it is to be a father in this modern day. So I started following a few things online, and I started following Mantra Men's work, which is owned and run by David Ross Miller. And I noticed that there was a retreat happening in the November, last November, and there was going to be 10 spaces funded. It was a special project by a shop in Glasgow. 10 spaces funded by the shop owner in Glasgow. Glasgow, sorry. It's Finiston Clothing in Glasgow. If anyone wants to check them out, and the owner is Ross Geddes. I think I'm getting his name right. I've never met Ross, but he funded 10 men to go on one of Mantra Men's work retreat, a 3-day retreat. And I applied, thinking nothing of it. I think I applied with tens and tens of men, but I was lucky enough to get a space on this retreat. So yeah, I went along in November, and I went along with quite a lot of not skepticism. I was certainly excited, but I went along with quite a lot of baggage. I think, and emotional baggage, just over the past few years. I think certainly COVID played a part in that with everyone. Um, but yeah, things like 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, my father had quite a large stroke, which has left him without the ability to use his voice, and he's been affected down one side of his body. So I was really I've been holding quite a lot of stuff,
Mm.
and I thought maybe it's time I go to a retreat like this and see what happens. So yeah, I turned up there in November, and it really it blew my mind. It was amazing. It really was.
What is your involvement with it going forward? Because I know you were discussing that you're kind of taking some practices of it as well.
Yeah. So after November, I got chatting to David over the following months, and he asked if I'd be interested in teaching yoga um, at one of his retreats or one of his events at some point. And I said it would be an honor, an absolute honor. So that just happened there in March. I was teaching yoga up at a retreat center up north. And yeah, I taught a yoga session to these men who are on one of David's retreat, Mantra Man's work retreat, which was really good. It was something different, something I've never really done before. Is teach solely just a group of guys, and with the intention on putting a sort of masculine sort of spin on it. So yeah, there's David's page. There's Mantra Man's work. Highly recommend it for anyone that is any man certainly who is feeling like they're needing direction in life, needing some coaching, whether that be with finances or relationships or sex or any of these things, but also men who are looking for connection. Like, what I mean by connection is like authentic connection, which isn't just a bit of lad banter or a bit of, it often goes misogynistic lad banter is the way it goes. But what I mean is true authentic connection, sort of moving past the BS and talking to other men about real life problems. There is a community there, and it's thriving. It's absolutely thriving. It's amazing work what they're doing.
100%. I think like what we touched on right at the start before the podcast started is the importance that to have these areas and spaces where men can talk. I think in a society now where it's certainly getting better, but I think there's still some real work needing to be done on men's mental health and how that can actually impact us.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I would agree. I found certainly that it took me until, I'm 33 this year. It took me until my 30s, or probably having kids, to think, right, I now need to assess
Baggage.
yeah, and my social circle, and being like, I've got good friends for sure, but I'm looking for something that's on like an authentic, deeper connection,
Mhm.
you know. But trying to find that, I've found, is difficult. When I do tree surgery, it's a masculine environment. I've only ever worked with a couple of women doing tree surgery. Um, it's quite a it can be quite an intense environment, a loud environment, and I found there's not a lot of chatting on a level that I would like. But I think that's maybe because I've been seeking something a bit
Hmm.
deeper, you know. And even it probably wouldn't matter which workplace I was in. I've always wanted to talk about things that are on a slightly deeper level. You know, ask when I ask someone how are you, I really really mean like how are you,
Like, how are you?
and
Yeah.
I really really like, and I want them to give me the true response, the authentic response. But that's so difficult. That is so difficult to be honest with someone in that moment, because you think there's many things that come into it, like, oh, I don't want to um sort of
Just
add on to
unload.
their woes, and I don't want to unload. Exactly, yeah. um so I think it's really, really important for men to have these spaces. And what was I watching something recently, and it was described as like a third space. So you've got
Mm.
like your work environment, your home environment, but a third space on that list, somewhere you can go and sort of be held. And what I mean by be held is like you can moan, you can be scared, you can be honest, and like radically honest. You know,
Hmm.
maybe more honest in that space than you have ever been with family or friends sometimes, because sometimes it's easier to be more honest with people that you don't really know or people you've just met. I think now more than ever, these spaces are needed. You know, we all know, we don't need to go over them. The figures for suicide in Scotland in men in a certain age bracket, and I think we're in that age bracket. The figures are astounding. They're absolutely astounding, um, and I feel like it's something that I see it as a duty almost to act on that. Especially now I've got children. You know, I have a son. I have a son and a daughter. I have a son on the way, and I see it almost as a duty to create a new, maybe not create a new culture. That seems quite grandiose, but
Space that it's acceptable to speak,
right.
acceptable to be your true authentic self around the people
Mhm,
you love.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think so many people don't have these spaces for so many reasons, but we are starting to see them pop up more. We're starting to see more men's groups popping up, um, sort of social meetups, men's
Mm.
mental health groups, men's mental health charities, and stuff like that. So it is happening. It definitely is happening. Even since becoming aware of it, becoming aware of men's work probably a couple of years ago, 2 3 years ago, aware of it as in like online and stuff, I've seen it really grow. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's needed now more than ever.
I think it's quite brave of you to think about not unloading that old baggage of yours, whatever it may be, on your children as well.
Mm,
Like, you having that ability to self reflect. Like, this is perhaps where I've came up short in life before, but let me better myself so my kids can get the
mm,
best growth possible. I think that's really, really important to look at as well and
mhm.
identify that you've done.
Yeah, yeah. It is because there has to be a break in the chain somewhere. You know, there has to be, and there's a lot of chat now about trauma and epigenetics and ancestral trauma and stuff like that. And I think we'll all go through traumatic things in our life, no matter what. That's just it's part of I think it's part of the human experience. It's what shapes us. It's what makes us to a certain extent, the good and the bad, right? The easy times and the hard times. But I think in the past, certainly in the past, like couple of 100 years, I feel like thousands of years ago, maybe things might have been a little bit different when we're living in smaller populations. But now we're living in bigger populations. I don't think we get a chance to know people
Mm.
around us quite as intimately, and maybe not trust people around us quite as intimately, right? And I think for a man, like you said there, unloading that onto the kids. For a man, if they're worried about, say they're worried about their finances or their job, and they don't have a third space to go to, they don't want to go to their partner, their life partner, because they don't want to put stress on them about money or work. So that's worrying them. That's really eating away at them. And then their kids, I don't know, flips over a bowl of spaghetti over their head or something. That energy from there is more likely to go to boom, that spaghetti. They're more likely to kick off about that because they're
Hmm.
holding that, and there's no deposit. They can't deposit that anywhere. And there's ways
Yeah.
we can. Sure, there's exercise, there's diet, there's meditation, there's all that sort of wellness stuff. But I think it takes more than that. I think it takes a community, um, possibly a brotherhood, to hold that person and be like, right, this is a space you can come to and work through those things. And then you can go back to your family, you can go back to your realm, your house, and you can be there for them truly in a more authentic way, in a calmer way, in a more regulated way.
Like my partner's quite big on this with me because like I'm quite good at just letting everything ball up. And again, it goes back to your example, but our example is like it's not you stubbing the toe that caused the anger outburst. It's everything that happened before the stubbing of the toe.
Mm, mm.
Because you can cuss that table out all at once. The table was always there.
Right. Yeah. 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 For sure.
uh,
For sure.
but it's like it's this sense of like let's work through all our shit before anything comes, so we can effectively deal with their little niggles and their little pains.
Mhm,
So like we're fully functioning at that time. Um,
mhm.
and that again, I think that's real strength as well, like in men especially, because like we're not used to being able to talk about feelings and how that is going. So we're back. So off camera, we were speaking about a little bit of a previous conversation that we've had on movement with load and how that could apply to yoga and what would be the potential benefits of it. Um, so if you just want to give us your take on sort of loaded movement and stretching.
Yeah, so it's not something I've deeply, deeply explored in my personal practice yet, I would say, but I'm definitely I'm inspired to when I see what it can lead to. I think the question with loaded, so take loaded stretching. So say you're in like a straddle pose, your legs are
Mm,
wide and you're sitting on the floor. Um, loading that would be leaning forward and having like a weight on your back, like a weight plate. And take your pick. The idea being that's adding to that forward fold. Now, I guess you're looking at like what's the goal here? Is it to get more flexible? But being flexible without being strong and mobile is, I don't think, very useful. It's the same with being the strongest person in the world without having good mobility or flexibility is poor as well. And being the most mobile person in the world with no strength, it's we need that
mm-hmm,
trifecta, in my opinion: strength, mobility,
100%.
and flexibility. So I think with the loaded stretching, it's allowing us to access a slightly deeper range of motion. And when we're there, if we can calm our nervous system down, whether it's through breathing or through other means, and being like, this is okay, it's, as far as I know, sort of creating newer or more robust neural pathways in the brain to say, right, I'm good here under this load. I'm safe. I've not hurt anything. So then when we do that, if we practice that with load a few times, and then we start practicing without that load, we can go into that range of motion. And I often say to my students, like, if you were under general anesthetic, your range of motion increases quite significantly. If someone's shoulder extension is here when they're conscious, put them under GA, and their hand
Mm-hmm,
might be away behind their head. Now, to me, that shows the how powerful the mind is in terms of that mind body connection. People think, oh, my muscle isn't long enough, or my muscle
mm-hmm.
isn't flexible enough. Your muscle's the same length as it has been for a very long time. like I think often people think when you stretch, you're stretching your muscles and they stay
Yeah.
they stay long. Yeah, they're like rubber bands, right? They go backwards and forwards. But what's happening? when you stretch, you get more, as far as I'm aware anyway, you get more comfortable in that space. So the time spent in that stretch, say it's a forward fold, for example, time spent there, if you slow your breath down, your brain gets more comfortable that you're not going to injure yourself as long as you're not pushing it too far. Brain gets more comfortable that you're in a safe space. You can regulate your breathing here. You can breathe in this position. So when you go back to that, those neural pathways are slightly more robust, and you can access that range of motion slightly more. I'm definitely more. I definitely want to start adding um, loaded straddle, so legs wide with a plate on my back, and practice that sort of coming back up as well with that load on. I've seen that benefiting.
The more concentric phase of that movement.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen that benefiting people in various ways in terms of back and hip stuff and things like that. Um,
So that's
it's,
what I was about to say. So my take on the loaded stretching and movement is that it teaches you to be stronger during weaker phases,
mm,
if that makes sense. Because if you're fully extended, so your finger that's fully extended, if you're then in a situation where you're having to react quickly to a stimulus that's coming at you, or you're having to react to something, you're more likely to be stronger in that fully stretched position.
mm,
So
mm,
and then again I found benefits to that in an injury sense. So with injury comes restricted movement. How can we get restricted movement to ease off? By stretching. But stretching is only going to get you so far, because then you'll have to go back to your sport and perform those movements at the same level that you did before.
mm,
Now, how effective will that be without any sort of loading in there, whether it's normal periodization and programming, or including these little pockets of eccentric and concentric phases through your rehabilitation program as well?
mm, mm. Yeah, I like what you touched on there. Like, sort of, life throws something at you where, uh, suddenly you need to be strong at that end range of motion, right? And one thing we were working on in class last week is a little bit of PNF, so proprioceptive neuromuscular feedback. And we were working it for shoulder extension. So we were on our knees. It's called puppy pose or heart melting pose in yoga. So you're on your knees with your hips above your knees and you walk your hands out, keeping your hips above your knees as best you can,
Mhm.
toes tucked or untucked. And you walk your hands out and let your chest melt to the ground. Now, that's quite a nice stretch for the chest, for the shoulder. It can be quite restorative, quite intense for a lot of people. But what I was doing is I was getting my students to then tent their fingertips. And as much as their chest was pushing to the ground, I was getting them to push as hard as they could into their fingertips. So they
Mm.
were really working that shoulder at the end range of motion. So they're in quite a deep shoulder stretch and they're pushing their hand down quite hard into the ground. And I was trying to give them some real life scenarios as to why this, because it's quite a, I don't know, it can be quite a minging drill,
That's
to be honest. It can be pretty intense. A lot of people come out of it and they're like, ooh, that the burn gets going really. But I was saying, for a lot of people, I've certainly been in situations where I've slipped over, whether that's on ice or something on the floor, and I've went to grab something. I've went to just reach for anything. And often, if you're on your way down as you're falling, that thing's above you. So if
Mhm.
your shoulder extension is, if you've got more range of motion in your shoulder, but not only that, you're strong at the end of that range of motion, there's less likely of injury, in my opinion, because so many times you hear about people falling, they break a wrist, their shoulder goes out, their knee goes or the back goes when they fall. So I think the more robust you can be at these end ranges, I think maybe less chance of injury overall.
I think I agree 100%. And it's that notion of we're trying to balance people out as best as we can. That's how I see programming athletes. Is like, what buckets do they need filled for their sport and their particular style of playing, or playing or sort of being coached and participating in their sport. And
Mm,
you need essentially balanced athletes, because if you've got a balanced athlete, he's got speed, he's got power, he's got strength, he's got mobility, he's got the ability to reach all end ranges in a stronger
Hmm.
potency of what they can do.
Hmm.
So I think that is exactly right. It's like even for the older population in society, their main worries is falling over and breaking a hip.
Yeah,
How can we stop that? Let's
yeah.
get them stretching and moving and loading these mechanical patterns that they do on a day to day. Like if
Hmm.
I have the times I've had older population, it's been more like shoulder presses. Let's get the cans and the tins of beans and stuff onto the
Hmm.
shelf. Shoulder
Hmm.
press, the farmers' carries, shopping bags. There's like
Hmm.
these functional movements that they can then transfer to their daily life.
Hmm.
So if they do fall and if something happens, they're able to catch themselves and not
Yeah.
be fragile to end up in hospital or with broken bones.
Hmm. Hmm. Definitely, I agree. Like real world applications. I think that's why I sometimes, if I'm creating an event or a new class, I add sort of like functional vinyasa yoga, and that's what I mean by my functional anyway. Is like, how can it be functional in day to day life? How can you take it into day to day life? And excuse me, one thing for me was a deep squat. I
Mm,
was inspired seeing my son when we had our son 4 years ago, just naturally dropping into that squat and playing. We're like, wow, that's amazing. And try to emulate that. And now we can. Now we can both play together in that
mhm,
squat. Granted, he's in it way longer than I am, my front of my shins start cooking. But it's true, we all used to do that.
mhm,
Um, and I often say to people in class, like, you're not you're not learning this range of motion for the first time. You're relearning it, right? You're born with it. You're born if you ever have a newborn baby, their hips and shoulders, it's
mhm.
quite amazing, just like
When they start
the
doing their
range of
toes.
motion.
Oof.
Yeah, yeah, it's incredible. So we're relearning these movement patterns. Um, but it's interesting what you were talking about there, like a balanced athlete. I I don't think, and I do say this to my students, like yoga, yoga asana, what we were talking about, the physical yoga. I don't think is a whole body practice. It can do so many wonders for the body, so many good things, strength in so many areas, mobility in so many areas, flexibility in so many areas. But there's a key component of movement that is missing from yoga asana, just doing yoga on the mat, and that is pulling.
Mm,
There's little to no pulling in yoga that I can think of. Excuse me. Apart from maybe if you're standing on one leg with the leg straight out, you're pulling your toe. Um, so I do say to my students, it's great that you come to yoga and you're enjoying it, but try hang from pull-up bar.
mm,
Maybe try in some cable work. There's a lot of pushing in yoga. There's not much pushing, which leads me on to actually that sort of cross training balanced athlete. I started lifting weights for the first time again in December last year.
mm.
I hadn't lifted weights for years and years and years since rugby times, and even then, I wasn't that great. I slacked off it quite a lot. There were 6 months where I went hard at the weights and then let it all go to the wayside. But I put my back out in November, maybe October, November last year, swinging a kettlebell,
Yeah, I
completely
think we
ignorant.
mentioned this. Yeah.
Put my back out and I was like, oh dear, this is bad. So I hired a coach, um, and we done 6 weeks. I done 5 or 6 weeks of physio, and then I hired a coach. And I was like, right, listen, in Galashiels, which is brilliant. And I was like, I'm just gonna do what you tell me to do for the next 6 weeks. And since then, I've been going to the gym almost weekly. And the transformation it has had on my yoga practice is really, really interesting.
So we are back. We had a little break. We let Neil die, and he's now back alive with us.
I'm not used to talking this much, clearly.
No, it's all good. So you were saying that you hired a coach, and you were sort of implementing his strength-based training to your yoga, and how that sort of benefited it.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to. monitor because I originally wanted to start lifting weights again to strengthen my posterior chain, um, my glutes, my left glute in particular, having been assessed by a physio, was quite a lot weaker than my right through various things, probably over the years. Excuse me, longboarding, maybe something to do with tree surgery. I'm weighting my right foot a lot more than my left when I'm cutting with a chainsaw. So that was the goal, and I just started doing. I just said, "I'm in your hands." I just started doing the classic. I'm still not up with the lingo and the kgs and the reps, and like I'm used to yoga and flowing and yoga studios. So but that's why I'm enjoying it so much because I'm kind of out of my comfort zone in the gym in the free weight section. So yes, squatting, deadlifts, bench, and then some core stuff. And then I'm doing like weighted pull ups, weighted dips. So I've been doing that pretty consistently for a couple of months now. And the biggest thing I've noticed is my, excuse me, my shoulder strength, especially in inversions and hand
Mm.
balances, arm balances, and handstand. So I didn't really train handstand for a while after I hurt my back because when I'm in a handstand, I just feel like there's a reasonable amount of pressure on that low back if you're not engaging your glutes enough. I didn't train it much until I felt my low back was good. I was deadlifting a reasonable amount. I couldn't feel my back at all, and I was doing shoulder work in between this the shoulder press and sort of other shoulder things. Went back to kicking upside down just in between classes, playing around with handstands, and like suddenly I just held my longest handstand I'd ever held. Just I was just like, what is going on here? I'm very comfortable here, and I'm not fatiguing. So I just kept holding it, and then came down. And I was like, wait, just now, what's going on? I've not trained that for a very long time, but I've been training other things, right? So that was the biggest sort of indicator to me that yes, yoga asana, the physical yoga, is an amazing practice for your entire body and your nervous system in so many ways, but it's not a full practice. There's more we can do as humans. We need more, right? Whether
Mm.
that's just a pull-up bar or whether that is some loaded exercise with free weights or whatever it is, kettlebells, bands, things like that. There is more we need, and then obviously we've got a whole bunch of cardio and stuff as
Yeah,
well.
it kind of goes back to that balanced human, where you're bringing different elements from different disciplines to create this whole system to build up your specific needs.
For sure, without a doubt.
Explored much with the pulling movements through your yoga practice since getting a coach and adding these different elements into it?
No, it's really difficult in yoga. I've found to add in a pulling motion. I guess you can be thinking about pulling as in ab work, as in pulling your feet closer towards you and things like that. Um, but no, I wouldn't say I've explored it in yoga much because I find it difficult because yoga's so much push and balance. So no, I wouldn't say I've changed anything different in terms of like what I'm sequencing or anything. I just feel stronger when I'm doing it, to be honest.
The immediate thought that I got, and again, you can tell me if this is a stupid idea straight away. I will not take it to heart. Is like if you if you have a towel in between your hands, you peel it
Mm,
this way, so it's like the stretch, so you're getting some back activations. Pull
yeah,
here,
yeah.
and then do some type of pulling
Okay.
motion.
hmm
Is that
hmm
something
hmm
that would work for
I
you?
guess it would. I guess it would. I think I'd still rather encourage people to go elsewhere for like
Mm.
that,
Their whole
because
rounded, yeah.
yeah, exactly. I don't like the only props I tend to use in a yoga class are yoga blocks
Hmm.
for balance. I don't really use bands or anything like that. I like that in class, and I think as well.
That as well goes a bit more into Pilates, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit more, a little bit more, and going back to sort of like teach what teach what I enjoy and teach what I practice. At home, I'm not really practicing that. Like I've got a band. Actually, it's just always lying around. So I've got a band which I use 2 3 times daily, just for overhead all the way
Mm.
around and getting my shoulders moving. Um, but yeah, I probably wouldn't take those into class.
Yeah.
I just definitely encourage people just to find a pull-up bar. If you can't do a pull-up, hang off it, and maybe try some scapula activation,
Hmm.
which is something we do work on in class quite a lot. Is scapula activation, and that idea of when you're pushing into the ground in plank pose or handstand, most people can usually push about 10 or 20% more than they actually are pushing. Sometimes it just takes like a little finger on the upper back, and then you see the scapula lift slightly more, and they're really then pushing.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing a little bit of what you do and your knowledge. Again, I love speaking to you about yoga and the different practices that you go through and how you implement the science element and the bodily, physical elements of it as well. Like I've been very honest with you on that. Thank you as well for the breathing um, workshop as well. That was very interesting.
Super
Uh,
simple.
That's it. Like it's something it's a controllable variable that you can control every single day. It's like how well are you breathing for that day,
Mm.
and what is that? How is that impacting your day as well? So like for me, that's always a very interesting topic to go through. No, that's perfect. If you want to share anything that you're doing or any events that you've got coming up that people can book into.
Nothing, nothing at the moment. Just my usual teachings. You can find me on Instagram. I don't have a website, but Instagram is Neil Young Yoga and Movement. I'm not amazing at posting, but I do post. I do photography as well. So there's some photographs on there, some nice ones, I think. Um, but yeah, follow me on Instagram if you can, and any classes or workshops I do will be on there. And yeah, if there are any, just want again reiterate, if there are any men out there who are struggling in any way, reach out to someone, whether that's a friend or someone you don't know, or yeah, a group like Mantra Men's Work, um, or ping me a message on Instagram. I will happily talk to you, no matter who you are, about anything. If you feel like you're in a place where you're kind of stuck, again, I'm no therapist, I'm no guru, but I'll happily have a chat and try and reassure you that things can get
Mhm.
better.
You're a human.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I like to use that. I think it's important to be a human.
for sure, man, for sure. Yeah,
No, I
definitely.
appreciate your time for today, and I'll probably try and catch up with you at some point.
Nice one, Manny. Thanks very much, dude.